Right? Nobody who's in prison ever thinks they're going to go back to prison, but unfortunately that's not the way things work out. Today I'm going to tell you the story about Gary, who is he was a friend of mine. I met him when I was at Lompoc, and this is like at the end of my journey. I'd been in prison already for probably 20 years or so, and I went to the camp at Lompoc, and one of my friends there's name was Gary. Now Gary's an interesting character. He's a well-educated guy. He had a background as an MBA and also as a CPA, and he was also a lawyer, but he didn't practice law. He built a career as a manager for celebrities in Beverly Hills, LA, and it was a pretty good career for him where he would manage their money, not as an agent, but just helping them spend because they don't want to pay their credit card bills or get their hotel reservations or book their airlines. He had to figure out how to do it. And I really enjoyed learning the story of different people. So what happened with Gary is he would place his customers' money into various investments. And one of the investments that he'd put them into was a factoring company. Now, a factoring company is a business that provides liquidity or cash to businesses that have receivables, but sometimes it takes a while to get those receivables. And later, a couple of years into it, it's like the business is kicking off a relatively good return, but a couple of years into it, the guy that owned the factoring company gets into a car accident and he kills, somebody dies, and he was drunk. So it turns into negligent homicide or a manslaughter case for the guy who owned the car company, which doesn't seem like it has anything to do with Gary. The problem is when the guy who owned the factoring company got in trouble with the law, he was going to lose the business. He would not be able to continue his business. And all of a sudden, Gary is kind of in a vulnerable position because he had put millions of dollars that belonged to his customers into that business. And he didn't want to run the problem of those people losing their money. So he decided to take it over. And when he decided to take it over, he had to look in the books and he found out that the guy had been absconding with like, I don't know, $1 million or $1.5 million or some non-trivial amount of money. And Gary had a decision to make. He said, well, I could turn it in to the FBI, which would effectively result in the people losing the money. And in addition to their losing the money, it would ruin my reputation because it would be showing me as not a good steward of their money. Maybe he shouldn't have put their money into a business where the owner could potentially have the poor judgment to drink and drive, which resulted in somebody dying. So instead of turning it into the police, he decided to put his own money into the business and try to keep it running. But he said that it kind of bothered him a little bit while he was driving because he thought he was taking it in there, but the money's really also belongs to his wife. Had taken $1 million or $1.5 million out of their family's money without telling him, he'd be upset. And rightfully so, he thought. So he thought he had a duty to disclose this to his wife. I don't remember his wife's name, but I met her in the visiting room, a nice lady. And he went and disclosed it to her, and she asked him, she was a teacher and a very ethical lady. And her question to him, well, is this legal for you to not disclose this to the customers? And Gary said, well, it's kind of a gray area because I didn't do it, but I know that it happened. And so I don't want to disclose it. We could just make it right. It's going to cost me $1.5 million, but the business is very successful and it will make it up with my leadership. So Gary agrees to pursue that path, and his wife says, oh, you've got to notify the authorities. So Gary does that. He notifies the authorities, and Gary is a target because he's a high net worth, Beverly Hills, high profile guy who makes for a great headline with the DOJ prosecutors. But he turns himself into LA County. I think it was LA County. The LA County then turned it over to the FBI, and the FBI indicts Gary for fraud. What's the fraud? Well, the fraud is that he knew that this guy had absconded with money, and instead of letting the customers know, Gary continued to pay them as if they were in a good business model. And that's not honest, right? The honest answer is that the money was taken in an unlawful way, and the customer didn't know about it. Well, they indict him for fraud. He gets sentenced to 3 years. And when I meet him in prison, he's like in his last 7 months of that period of time. We meet together at Lompoc. He's maybe 15 years older than I am. We become pretty good friends. He's interested in finance and the stock market, which gave us like a common thing to talk about. We would do this. So let's look at what I'm doing right now. We'd walk around the track. We'd talk about what's going on, and we'd discuss the market. This was around the time of, was it around 9/11? No, it was later than that. But it was around, it was the time of Hurricane Katrina. I remember the landmark. It's Hurricane Katrina at this time. So he gets out of prison. You know, a lot of times you're in prison, you make friends, they get out. You wish them well, and you don't expect to ever see them again. And that was certainly the case for me with Gary. Well, you had to fast forward maybe 3 or 4 more years. And now, actually probably 3 more years. He gets out. By that time, I got transferred from the camp at Lompoc to a different camp. It's no longer open in Bakersfield. And my routine was typically I would get up very early in the morning, as soon as they would open the yard, and I would go out for a long run. I really enjoyed that alone time to think about what am I going to do on the other side of this journey. One day I'm running, and I see a guy that looks like Gary. And so I kind of pause a little while before him, and it's Gary. So I said, Gary, what are you doing here? And he said, oh, it's been an awful experience. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, when I got out of prison, relatively soon after I got out of prison, the probation officer told me that I had to ask for permission anytime I was going to leave the district. He was from the Central District of California, the Los Angeles area. And so he said, anytime I leave, I have to ask permission. He said, well, I'm glad you told me that, because I need to ask permission about going to a wedding. See, while I was incarcerated, my good friend died, and I have known his daughter since she was born, and she considers me like a second father, and she asked me to give her away at the wedding. So I'd like to have permission to go to the wedding. And the probation officer said, let me take care of that for you. And a week passed, and another week passed, another week passed, and she never gave him the permission. So the girl could not plan the wedding. Eventually he couldn't go, and Gary said he just made a decision that if he ever again, just go and not mention it. And that was his strategy for the next couple of years. Fine, until it's like the final months before he's going to finish his term of supervised release, and his probation officer, a lady with whom he thought he had a great rapport, said to him, okay, you're almost done. What I'd like you to do now is bring me all the receipts from your credit cards over the past 3 years. And Gary doesn't have a choice, because she asks for them, she has the right to them. Gary gives her the credit card receipts, and she sees that he had purchased gasoline or stayed in a hotel in like San Francisco and one time in San Diego. And you know, they're only driving distances away from Los Angeles, but they're in different districts. You see, in the state of California, there are 4 judicial districts. The Central District, which is the Los Angeles, Orange County area. Then there's the Northern District, which is the San Francisco Bay Area. The Eastern District, which is inland, like Riverside and that area. And then there's the Southern District, which is a pretty small district, just encompassing San Diego. But if you're going to go to one of those areas, you've got to have permission. He didn't ask permission. She got the credit card receipts. She violated him, which means she sent him back to prison. She charged him. He had to go through a court proceeding again. The judge returned him to prison for 6 months. And that's not the end of the story. because his wife came to see him and she said, I did this with you once. I can't do it again. And she divorced him. And this guy was like 62, 63 years old. He'd lost all of his wealth. He'd lost his liberty not once, but twice. And as a result, his sense of peace and self and confidence, everything was shaken. And that's a really sad thing. Why does something like that happen? Well, if a person doesn't understand the system, it's very easy to become complacent. Those are the lessons that I would like you to learn if you're working through the prisonprofessors.org website. We produce a tremendous amount of free information to give you this insight, because there's too many people who will go to prison and say, oh, nobody ever told me. Oh, I didn't know it was serious. But it is very serious if you've got a criminal indictment. It has tremendous collateral consequences, but there's also a path to build a better life. There's always more opportunities in the future than in the past, but only if you do your part and prepare for the best possible outcome. You can get all that information for free. Don't have to pay anybody anything, but you definitely have to put in the time to educate yourself. So I always make 3 promises on these videos. 1, I'm never gonna lie to you. 2, I'm never gonna ask you to do anything I didn't do. And 3, I'm never gonna ask anybody to pay me a penny. It's super important for me that people in prison or going into prison learn how to prepare for a life of meaning and relevance and dignity, and they come home and they have a life of abundance and rebuild. That's what it means to recalibrate, and that's what I hope you will do by learning all of these lessons on prisonprofessors.org. You can read our impact paper, you can see what we're all about, but we really just want people who are going into the system to learn there is a better path forward, but it doesn't happen by accident. Be cool.